Russia just told the world that NATO membership will not protect Latvia, and what happened next was not a warning, it was a confession. If you think this is just another headline about Europe, stay right here, because what is happening to Latvia right now is the blueprint for how the next war could actually begin. And most people have no idea it is already in motion. Latvia is a small country on the eastern edge of Europe. It has a population of fewer than 2 million people. It sits right on Russia's border. And for the last several years, it has been living inside a shadow war that most of the world refuses to call by its real name. This story is not just about Latvia. It is about what Russia is doing across Europe right now, why it is doing it, and what it tells us about where things are heading. Because what is being built here, piece by piece, target by target, is not just pressure, it is a strategy. Let us go back to April 2026. Russia's ambassador to the United Nations, Vasily Nebenzia, stood up and claimed that Ukraine was planning to launch military drones from Latvia and other Baltic countries. He then said something extraordinary. He said that Russian intelligence already knows the decision-making centers inside Latvia, and he made clear that NATO membership would not protect these countries from retaliation. Just like that, at the United Nations, on camera, in front of the world. Latvia's representative called it pure fiction. The United States Deputy Ambassador condemned it and reaffirmed the full power of NATO's Article 5. But here's the thing. Russia said it anyway. And Russia saying it out loud was not a mistake, it was a message. When a nuclear power walks into the room and tells you by name that it knows exactly where your headquarters are and that your alliances will not save you, that is not diplomatic language. That is a threat, and it was delivered in broad daylight. Now you might be thinking, Russia says a lot of things, that is true, but what Russia is doing on the ground inside Latvia and across Europe right now is something very different from words. In October 2025, Latvia's State Security Service uncovered a 4-person group that had been operating inside the country on behalf of Russian intelligence. These were not foreign agents slipping across the border in the middle of the night. 3 of the 4 suspects were Latvian citizens, people who lived there, people who drove on those roads and walked into those buildings and photographed those facilities and sent the images back to Russia. According to what was made public, this group had already carried out 1 arson attack in 2023 against a company connected to a defense-related project. They had also been caught planning to burn a truck with Ukrainian license plates inside a critical infrastructure site, and they had been quietly scouting other targets, filming them, mapping them, reporting back to Moscow, right there, inside a NATO country. This is what hybrid warfare actually looks like. Not tanks on the border, not missiles in the sky. It looks like your neighbor taking photos of the power station down the road and sending them to someone you cannot see. And Latvia is not alone in this. According to researchers tracking Russian-linked attacks across Europe, the number of confirmed arson and serious sabotage incidents tripled between 2023 and 2024. By 2024, there were at least 34 documented cases, and analysts believe the actual number is much higher because many of these operations are only identified once investigations are completed, sometimes months or even years later. At this point, a smart question is worth asking. Why Latvia? Why now? And why does it keep getting worse? To understand that, you have to understand what Russia actually believes about the Baltic states. Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania all used to be part of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, they broke free, they joined NATO in 2004, and Moscow has never fully accepted that. In Russia's worldview, those countries were not supposed to leave, and every year they spend inside NATO, thriving, building, aligning with the West, is an insult to the story Russia tells about itself. But the timing also matters enormously. Latvia's own military intelligence agency published a report making something very clear. Russia's direct military invasion of Latvia in the near term is considered unlikely, but the medium and long-term picture is a different story entirely. Russia is currently spending at least 40% of its federal budget on defense and national security. Moscow has announced plans to expand its armed forces from 1 million to 1.5 million personnel. And once the war in Ukraine reduces in intensity, the calculations in the Kremlin are expected to shift westward. What that means is simple. Right now, Russia's military is tied down in Ukraine. The soldiers are there, the equipment is there, the focus is there. But that is not a permanent situation, and Latvia's intelligence service is essentially warning that when that focus shifts, Latvia should expect Russian military presence near its borders to grow. That is not a guess. That is a professional assessment from people paid to watch Russia every single day. And Russia is already restructuring its military presence along its Baltic flank. The old Western Military District, which bordered Latvia directly, has been split into 2 separate military districts. New army corps are being formed. New command structures are being built in regions like Karelia and Kaliningrad. Most of the pieces are not yet fully operational because the resources are still in Ukraine, but the architecture is being assembled, slowly, deliberately. Here is something that tends to get lost in the noise. Russia's wartime economy is not going to simply switch off when the fighting in Ukraine ends. Decades of economic research tell us that when a country restructures its entire economy around war production, around defense spending, around military priorities, that system develops its own momentum, its own political logic. The industries that grow during wartime need continued conflict to justify their existence. The generals who gain power during war need continued threat to preserve their influence. Latvia's intelligence service made this point directly. Russia's aggressive foreign policy, they said, has become not just a strategic choice, but a domestic necessity. That is a chilling sentence when you sit with it. Russia is not going to threaten its neighbors because it wants to. It is going to do it because its own system requires it to. So where does that leave Latvia? Latvia is responding with everything it has. In 2025, the country spent 3.8% of its entire economy on defense. In 2026, that number has risen to 4.91%. To put that in perspective, the NATO target that most member countries struggle to hit is 2%. Latvia is more than double that. It is one of the highest defense spending rates of any country in the entire alliance. Canada has deployed around 2,000 troops to Latvia as part of NATO's Operation Reassurance. NATO has multinational battle groups stationed in the country, and the alliance is building structures that would allow for the rapid deployment of tens of thousands of additional troops if a conflict ever began. In September 2025, Russian drones and aircraft violated the airspace of multiple NATO allies, including Latvia. The alliance launched special vigilance operations in the Baltic Sea. Undersea cable protection became a major operational priority after suspected Russian sabotage vessels were identified operating in the region. Latvia is not sitting still, but Latvia is also not the size of Russia. It is not the population of Russia. It is not the nuclear arsenal of Russia. And that asymmetry is the whole point. Russia does not need to invade Latvia to hurt Latvia. It does not need tanks on the streets of Riga to make Latvians feel afraid. It needs to keep the pressure constant, keep the uncertainty real, keep the question alive. Is NATO really going to protect you? Are your allies really going to come? Because that uncertainty, that erosion of confidence, that creeping fear is itself a weapon. There is a name for this. Scholars and security analysts call it the gray zone, the space between peace and war where Russia operates with maximum damage and minimum accountability. You bomb a building, that is an act of war. But you recruit a citizen to photograph a power station and send those images to Moscow, that is complicated. That is deniable. That is exactly the kind of operation that keeps lawyers and diplomats busy while the damage accumulates. And Russia has become extraordinarily good at operating in that space. Think about what was confirmed just in recent years. Arson attacks across Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, and the United Kingdom. Undersea cables cut in the Baltic Sea. Spy rings uncovered in multiple NATO countries. Disinformation campaigns designed to inflame political tensions. Recruitment of local citizens with cash payments and no visible connection to Russian intelligence. All of it traceable, when the investigation's complete, back to the same source. According to researchers at Globsec, it is reasonable to assume that the number of Russian hybrid incidents we know about is significantly lower than the number that have actually occurred. Most operations are only publicly confirmed once legal cases are concluded. Many never become public at all. This is the world Latvia wakes up in every morning. But here is what makes this story more than just a story about a small country on Russia's border. What is happening to Latvia is the testing ground for something larger. Russia is learning. Every operation that succeeds teaches Moscow what works. Every operation that fails teaches it what to avoid. The arson attacks, the recruitment of citizens, the underwater sabotage, the airspace violations. These are not random acts of aggression. They are data points in a continuous experiment. Russia is studying how NATO responds. It is studying how much pressure the alliance can absorb before it fractures. It is studying which countries push back hard and which ones hesitate. And it is doing all of this while its full military is otherwise occupied in Ukraine. That is the part that should make everyone pay attention. This is Russia operating at reduced capacity with its best forces elsewhere, still managing to threaten, probe, recruit, sabotage, and intimidate a NATO member state. What happens when Ukraine is no longer the primary focus? Latvia's intelligence service has already answered that question. The threat grows, the risk escalates, the window for deterrence gets narrower. What gives Latvia any chance at all is the alliance it joined 20 years ago. NATO's Article 5 is the reason Russia has not moved more aggressively. The promise that an attack on one member is an attack on all is the only thing that makes the math work in Latvia's favor. But that promise is only as strong as the political will behind it. And political will, as recent history has shown, is not a permanent condition. This is why every development in Western politics matters to people in Riga. Every debate about NATO funding, every question about American commitment, every crack in European unity is watched in Latvia with acute attention. Because Latvia's security does not rest only on its own army or its own budget. It rests on a collective agreement, and collective agreements are only as strong as the relationships that hold them together. There is a man walking through a market in Riga right now who is buying vegetables and talking to his neighbors and thinking about his children's school schedule. And somewhere in that same city, there is a government office where analysts are reviewing satellite images and intercepted communications and trying to calculate how much time Latvia has before the picture changes. These two realities exist at the same time in the same place. That is what it means to live on the front line of something that has not fully started yet. Latvia has survived occupation. It survived Soviet rule for 50 years. It fought its way back to independence. It built a democracy and an economy and a society from the ruins of a system designed to erase it. Its people know, in a way that most of us will never need to know, what it feels like to be small and surrounded and still standing. That history is not just inspiration. It is a warning, because the world let Latvia be absorbed once before. The world looked the other way when it happened, and the people of Latvia remember that. They remember it the way you remember something that changed everything, and they are watching now to see whether the rest of the world has learned anything at all. Russia has made its intentions clear, not in secret, not in private, at the United Nations, in official intelligence reports, in the shape of its military budget, in the structure of its military districts, in the fires that burned in Latvia's defense facilities, and in the operatives who were photographing power stations while their neighbors had no idea. The question is not whether Latvia is under threat. That question has already been answered. The question now is whether the world is paying close enough attention, whether NATO's promise holds, whether the line that was drawn in 2004 still means what it was supposed to mean. Because if that line blurs, if that promise softens, if the cost of solidarity starts to feel too high for the countries that have the luxury of asking that question from a safe distance, then Latvia will not be the last story like this. It will be the first chapter of a much longer one. Latvia is small. Latvia is strong, Latvia is watching, and what the world does next will determine whether its people are still watching in 10 years from the same country or from the ruins of one. That is not a hypothetical, that is the actual stakes, and now you know them. If this made you see something you had not seen before, share it with one person who thinks Europe's security is someone else's problem, because it is not, it never was.